Hi, I'm Kathy Sommer, multi-platinum songwriter, as well as composer, producer, arranger, and conductor.
And I'm Andrea Daly, composer, songwriter, and singer who's released a variety of studio and self-produced recordings. We both have worked across multiple genres and have had to approach recording projects from differing perspectives.
We're very excited to present this class to you, whether you're making your first demo or you've made previous recordings but want a deeper understanding of the process. Originally created for the Maestra musical theater community, our session includes examples from the musical theater repertoire, as well as music from various pop genres.
What we're providing is a wide-ranging overview of the process of making an album or a demo, be it in a recording studio or at home with your own gear, with a budget big or small, covering the following aspects: creation, pre-production, production, post-production, and release. Also, please note, if you are finding this class on YouTube, there are lots more wonderful classes on Maestra Music's website. So check out the link in the description below, and please enjoy the session.
Hi,
Hey
everybody.
guys.
Hey.
If you could also put in the chat your level of experience and things that you might be generally hoping to get out of this, that'd be great. It doesn't mean that we're going to go rewrite our keynote presentation in the next 2 minutes, but we would love to know. We'd love to know anyways. Okay, so you want to make an album or demo, that's fine too. What we'd love to do for you today is try and give a comprehensive bird's eye view of the process creatively and logistically. We'll do this slightly from a musical theater perspective, but cover other genres too. And we want you to know what to think, what to ask, and what to expect as you go into this process. At the end, we'll talk through some specific project examples in different genres, including listening. That's a lot to cover, so we'll need to move quickly. We recommend that you keep your eyes on the screen at all times. We recommend that you use headphones because Zoom audio, right? And please send your questions to Jamie. We'll get to all of them at the end. Also, if you don't want to take notes, no sweat, you'll get these slides and more material as handouts afterwards. So let us talk about the what, the where, the why, the who, the when, and the how of making an album or a demo. Specifically, what are we talking about here? Where can recording happen? Why are you even doing this? Who should be involved? When does each person get involved? And how do various kinds of projects operate? So let's start with the what are we talking about and the where can it happen? Recording can happen in 2 locations, generally speaking. You can do this in a studio, or you can do it at home. And sometimes it's a combination and you're doing a bit of both. The level of what you can create in either place is really a continuum, but for simplicity, we're gonna divide it into categories to make it easier to talk about. What you should know though, is that whether you're working with a big, mid-size, or a low budget in the studio, if you're in a studio, we can guarantee you that the recording quality is, you will have access to a very high quality recording. If your budget is on the lower end, you might need to cut some corners, whether that's number of personnel or tracks or the hours of studio time. But if you're working in a studio, you get access to a high quality recording. At home, you can also have access to a high quality recording if you've got pro resources, access to great gear, or a high personal skill level. You can still create really cool and exciting things with some resources or with few resources. Just be aware that the recording quality likely goes down the fewer resources that you've got at home. So we're going to assume that if you are watching this talk, you're not a famous pop star and or you don't have a fancy home studio. So we're going to try and spend most of our time talking about lower budget and projects at home with some resources or few resources. But we'll try to cover everything. So what about demos, you ask? I haven't mentioned that. So glad you asked. Demos. Let's define it first. A demo is a representation of your song that musically and sonically gets the point across, but without the time and money investment of a master version of the song. So a demo is to your master version as like the cliff notes are to your final draft of a book. Demos can happen anywhere. So if you're trying to drop 20 grand on your track for commercial radio and you need to make a demo of it, you're probably going to make a pretty fancy demo, but that doesn't mean the demos have to sound like that. Demos can be as simple or as complex as you want. They might be a single voice and a single instrument.
Walk in my shoes just for a bit. See if you're easy now with how they fit. Go as I go, be what I be.
Or you can literally throw everything at them. Those are both demos. Exciting. Okay, so let us, that was the what and the where. Let's jump into the why. Why are you making this recording? Take it away, Kath.
Right. So the first things you need to ask yourself are the following 3 questions. This is probably the most important screen in this talk, right? Why are you making this recording? Who's your audience? What do you want it to sound like? The answers to all these questions will have a direct impact on your project. So the why are you making this recording? Is it a vanity project? Is it to learn? Is it to get yourself out there in some way? Are you submitting for an application process or developing your following, promoting your new musical, getting your song on the radio with worldwide distribution? These are all the main questions. Then you want to ask, who is your audience? So know how wide a reach you're hoping for, and that will affect your budget significantly. Are you looking to target fans or industry folk or producers, investors, colleagues, collaborators, your mom maybe? And then lastly, what do you want it to sound like? In order to answer this question, you need to, 1, listen, and 2, know what you like and know why. To me, this is a really important thing. Bring in musical examples of what you're hearing and get specific, right? I like the sound of the drums in this bar and the kick specifically because of this pattern, right? I like the live Motown horns in this song, or I like the way the muted guitar seems to drive the whole arrangement of that track. The next thing you want to look at is, what genre is your music? Is it, specifically theater, pop, rock, R&B, alternative, indie, world, right? Or, and if it is it something like a combination, like Tom Waits meets Rodgers and Hammerstein, right? Or if you think your music defies categorization, you should still be able to compare and contrast your sound to other existing recordings.
If you think your music defies categorization, I'm rolling my eyes at you a little bit. I'm just
and then lastly, do you think you're going to play or sing on this? So know your strengths and play into them. And determine in advance the necessary personnel to help achieve that vision.
One thing that you want to know before you start your project is your budget. Where is the money coming from? Is this self-funded? Is it crowd-funded? You have a producer or a label that's throwing money at you. It's great when that happens. How much can you spend? So maybe you have 9 songs and you need to record those 9 songs and your budget is going to expand or contract to match whatever you need. Maybe you only have $9,000 and you need to figure out how many songs you can record for that amount of money. Always be in touch with your producer to ask them what is the best way to record X songs in X amount of time with X dollars. And then plan ahead for extra costs because they will always crop up. You are going to be sitting in DeGraw Studios in Brooklyn on 4th Avenue, and your saxophonist is going to call you from 4th Avenue in Manhattan at the same address, and it's going to be like, where's the recording studio? I can't find it. And you are going to have to sit in Brooklyn with your band and pay them for their time while your saxophonist drives in rush hour traffic for 2 hours to Brooklyn to get to your studio. It just happens. Maybe I'm speaking from experience. I don't know. Anyways, it's not an exact science. Creativity is not an exact science either, and you can have a vision but expect it to evolve if you have the time and the money to sort of follow the white rabbit where it leads. Also, don't forget your marketing budget. That kind of gets tacked on at the end and it's easy to forget. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, but there are a couple notes in the handout about it. That's the why. So now let's look at the who is involved and when each person is involved. To do that, we want to divide the album making process into 5 basic sections. Number 1, creation and writing, when you're producing the actual material that you want to record. 2, pre-production, when you're preparing that material before you go into the studio. 3, production, when you're recording that material in the studio. for post-production, when you're essentially manipulating that material afterwards and making tweaks and things. And then 5, release and distribution, when you have to do a whole host of other things to actually get your stuff heard by people, which is the ultimate goal. So you're going to be interfacing with a variety of professionals at every stage of this process. Watch these numbers on the left and follow them. Like making a musical and making an album requires a whole team of people. It's a little bit overwhelming sometimes. Don't hyperventilate. The process can involve some, many, or in rare instances, all of these roles. But the combo of people needed depends on your project and its size and its scope and its style and its budget and a lot of things. It's also common for professionals to specialize in a lot of roles at once, but you shouldn't assume that necessarily. So it's good to know what everybody's skills are before you get into the studio with them, or to work with a music producer who's responsible for hiring the right team so that you don't have to keep track of that and worry about it. We're going to go through each of these stages of the recording process and just define a couple of the roles that we think might be less familiar for people. We'll do that briefly in this talk, and then in the handout there are a lot more extensive definitions for those. So let's start with the first one.
And the next slide is, so the first step is the raw material, right? You all know what that is. Everybody here knows what a composer, lyricist, songwriter, and artist is. You might be less familiar with a top liner, which is somebody who creates melody and lyrics, or a beat maker, who is somebody who creates beats, obviously, or which are electronic and drum patterns, usually coming from digital samples. The next step of pre-production has to do with the prepping the music. Again, I think everyone's familiar with arranger, orchestrator, music copyist. The thing you might be less familiar with is a music contractor who is responsible for hiring the musicians, dealing with all things union and all issues regarding band or orchestra personnel.
In the production stage, you can also have an arranger in the studio as well. We're going to guess that you guys are familiar with MD or conductor, music supervisor, which tends to be just applicable to theater, and music contractor, which will be in the studio also. Producer, we're going to talk a lot more in just a moment, so I'm going to hold off on that one. A programmer creates sounds using MIDI and samples instead of live instruments if you need those elements in your track. The recording engineer is responsible for recording all of your live instruments and vocals during your session. So they're making decisions about mic placement, isolation, what compressors to use, what preamps sound the best. They're basically there to get you the best sounding audio possible. And then an audio editor, performers, self-explanatory, but an audio editor cuts and splices your takes together to create the best version of each person's performance. And this is key, they do it fast so that you can record other things on top of those new takes right away. And that process of cutting and splicing is also called comping. Once you get your stuff in the can, as they say, a mixing engineer takes your recorded song and then balances and manipulates the sounds in it to guide the listener's experience through the song and create a musical point of view, much the way that a conductor does. It's a cool comparison. And then a mastering engineer, who's a separate person, new set of ears, they take the final mix and do crucial quality control, minimizing any problematic frequencies and making sure the audio sounds good on different devices, different speakers, different listening environments. If you skip this step, you could end up popping a CD into your mom's car and playing it only to find that the bass does crazy things on your Subaru speakers, and that's awkward, so don't skip that step. Release and distribution. We're not going to, again, go into a lot of this stuff so much, but the most important thing that you want to remember as you think about artwork and promotional materials and stuff is to make sure that all of those choices visually reflect your musical vision. And then I will define a distributor, because if you have, if you're in a label situation, you have a record deal, then your label is going to handle distributing your music for you. But if you're self-releasing, then you also need to submit your work to a distributor, like a TuneCore or CD Baby, and they allow you, they distribute your music, meaning that they make it publicly available on all selling and streaming platforms like Apple Music and Spotify, etc., for a fee. I think TuneCore is $50 per year per album. Once you've done all that, then you should do this.
Right. And then you can submit to the Grammys. Woo! So you can submit any record to the Grammys for consideration in any genre. as long as it is commercially released. And there's information in the handout called Grammy 101, which will give you more details. Regarding musical theater, category near and dear to our hearts, and one of the original Grammy categories, know that all recordings of scores of musical theater works are eligible if they support a clear underlying dramatic intention or theme. That's the key. And be aware that this category is not only for Broadway cast albums. I repeat, not only for Broadway cast albums. You can submit. So our goal is, you'll see the musical theater one sheet, it'll give you more information about that. Our own Georgia Submidian, Georgia is submitting in trad pop, and Beth Falcone is submitting in musical theater. So we can all do it. Our goal is to help keep this category healthy and thriving, and you can do that by making and submitting your albums.
Cool, so we talked about a lot of other roles pretty quickly. Let's go into the producer in a little bit more detail. And just to be clear, we're not talking about lead producer, commercial producer, the producer in the sense that you hear it in theater. We're talking about a record producer. So a theater producer ideally is giving you money and not stepping on your toes too much. And a record producer, you are paying them to be involved in your project, and you want them to be very creatively involved and hands-on. So they're actually, producer for a record is kind of like an MD, but maybe with even more creative input, sort of like a rough parallel. So logistically and creatively, your producer serves as your #1 trusted collaborator throughout the entire album process, which means they do a lot of things. Your producer is a leader, often capable of managing all of your project's details, soup to nuts. They are your creative partner. They can help you define and execute your artistic vision. Sometimes they're literally co-writing the songs with you, creating your sound from the ground up. They can make your rough sketches sound amazing. During the recording process in the studio, or if you're working at their home studio at home, they are overseeing all track production, vocal production, and editing. And then after recording, this person is supervising and approving editing and mixing and mastering. So they're just sort of always there. And when the project is finished, depending on what kind of contract or deal you've signed with them, they can sometimes help you shop your material, or maybe even get you a record deal. So in other words, it's an extremely powerful role, and you want to make sure you're always teaming up with the right person for you. So
the questions you want to ask in advance, these are crucial. So ask when you're shopping for a producer, what's your musical wheelhouse, right? What's your favorite, most comfortable style? What are your favorite bands, performers, musicians, songs, musical theater albums, right? What's your work process like? Do you like to work from midnight to 6 a.m. or are you more of a 9 to 5-er? Right? What about the technology? Are you comfortable with working with recording live instruments as well as working with sampled loops or MIDI information? And in this day and age of virtual recording, check out the DAW capability and the ease of conversing back and forth with files. And lastly, really a crucial point, what is that person's level of experience and their track record? Ask around, see what you can find out. Also, next slide is, if you need additional help in finding your sound, either for you as an artist or for the song in general so that it resonates properly, your producer can help you, and make sure that you come prepared with references and ideas, and make sure that you feel that musical connection with the producer so that you really think that they're hearing you and hearing the voices in your head. So ask a lot of questions about that.
Do all producers approach their job the same way? No, they do not. There are different creative approaches to being a producer, and there are different financial approaches to working with one. So, you know, as you're asking questions, you can find out a little bit more. You can work with a producer who sort of decides that your artist's vision is dominant and wants to support and enhance that vision. There are some examples on the screen. You can also work with a producer whose own vision is more dominant, and in some cases that's because you as an artist are seeking their sound and trying to get into their sound. Other times it's just because they as a producer are pushing you as an artist to sort of reach something. And examples on the screen, have been very successful in doing just that. You can also work with a producer who really helps you explore and discover your sound, which is a little bit of both. It's common with newer or less experienced artists and often involves co-writing. Financially, you can work with a producer who, like our very own Kathy Sommer here, can wear all of the hats, can handle everything. Sometimes that's a situation that's designed to save money because you don't have to hire as many people, but it can also be an artistic choice. So Billie Eilish, for example, who just won the Grammy for Best New Album last year, produced, her brother Phineas produced that, and they made it in a bedroom with just the two of them. And that's another way to do it. There's middle ground as well, or also if you are limited on funds or you want to be making all of the creative decisions yourself, really, you can also hire a producer as sort of a consultant, basically an on-site engineer with some opinions. So let's dive into some project examples to look at how different kinds of projects operate. And as a refresher, these are the categories that we're going to talk about, and try to give one example from a theater perspective and one example from a pop perspective for each of these categories. And when we say pop in this context, we're using pop as kind of an umbrella term to include, you know, popular music in general, just non-theater. So it might be singer-songwriter, it might be R&B, it might be straight up commercial radio pop. So, and again, demos can happen anywhere. So let's start at home. When we talk about having different kinds of resources at home, we're really talking about what kind of gear you have and what kind of skills you've got in your arsenal. Since there are other Maestra workshops that can teach you all of those skills, we're going to focus on gear just briefly for a second and give a gear overview. If you're working at home, you're going to want to have these things on hand. The first and most important thing that you need to record at home is Emma Stone singing in your shower, by which I mean you need a performer that's going to make noise, and that's creating an analog signal that you can then capture using a microphone. And you have a lot of different options in terms of microphones. The simplest route that people use for podcasts or less professional audio recordings is a microphone with a USB hookup. And that's handy because it can plug straight into your computer because it has an AD converter inside it, an analog to digital signal converter. So you don't have to worry about any extra gear. It also boosts the audio artificially so that it's loud enough, sends it straight to your computer receives that digital signal. But if you want to make a more professional sounding recording, higher audio quality, you're going to want to be working with a microphone that has an XLR hookup that does not have an AD converter inside of it. So it means you're going to need to plug that microphone into an audio interface before it goes into your computer. The audio interface translates that analog signal to a digital signal. Most audio interfaces that you're going to use at home also have a preamp inside of them, which boosts the sound for real, not artificially, and it also colors the sound a little bit. So that's an important piece of gear that you don't want to have to get an extra preamp if possible, if you're trying to pare things down. So get an audio interface that has a preamp inside of it. Once you get this signal in your computer, then you want to be able to manipulate it, and that is where DAW software comes in. So DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. That's a Pro Tools, that's a Logic, or a GarageBand, or a Studio One, or Cubase. There are a ton of them. But that software records your digital signal as audio files and allows you to manipulate those files. Okay, let's say you don't want to sing. Let's say you want to play an instrument instead. Great. Let's say you have a synthesizer or a guitar or something else that is also creating an analog signal because it's a live instrument. That, because it's an analog signal, you're going to also need to plug that into your audio interface so that the AD converter in the audio interface can change that to a digital signal so that your computer can receive it. So just the gray rectangle here on the left is showing that this is live sound, and everything else on the right is recording or manipulating that sound. Now, a MIDI controller is not creating live sound, it's creating data. So if you want to, let's say you are one person and you need to record 20 parts and stack them on top of each other, great. You can play them all one by one with your MIDI controller and stack them that way. Or if you can play a piano part, for example, really slowly and you can't play it up to tempo, you can record it slowly on a MIDI controller, and because we're registering that sound as data instead of live audio, you can manipulate that more easily, change the tempo, etc. So if your synthesizer has a MIDI out port, you can also use it as a MIDI controller. If not, you'll need a separate piece of gear for that. Your computer also receives MIDI signal, and your DAW software records that MIDI signal as MIDI files and allows you to manipulate those files. So now in your DAW, you've got audio files, MIDI files, lots of stuff, and you want to polish them. That is where plugins come in. You can get all of these fancy little pieces of software called plugins that add EQ, distortion, compression, reverb, delay, a lot of really important sonic elements to your files, basically allowing you to manipulate all of your files further. I think that's it. Yes, great. So let's talk about demos.
Demos. You start, Andrea, about the price, right?
Oh, yes. I would like to start about the price. Demos, if you're just working with one song, you can have a wide range of costs on these. So we would estimate anywhere from $0 to $5,000. So we'll try to give two really contrasting examples of those.
Right, typical demo would be really between 1,000 and 2,500, something like that. So on this first song demo, Something in the Water, before I spend money on any demo, I ask myself all those questions we mentioned at the beginning of the talk. So for this particular song, I asked myself, why am I doing it? It's the answer is to be competitive in the commercial marketplace, to pitch to major artists, and I also wanted to pitch for sync, licensing for TV and film. Regarding style, I wanted it to walk between the pop market and the country market and to sort of walk that line. Challenging to do sometimes with one recording and different genres, but sometimes it can work if the song stays true enough to its essence. Then I wanted to ask myself about budget, right? So I wanted to do enough prep at home to save as much money as I could, but I also wanted to spend some money to compete. And so I chose someone who enhanced my skills in the following areas. One would be in engineering, mixing, and mastering. The other would be someone who has competitive of the moment sounds and another set of ears to play off of. And the third would be to be able to hire a great demo singer. In this case, it was Matt Anthony, my partner that I work with in production for the first two categories. And the demo singer is Taylor Van Cleve, who I think is super talented, and you will hear him right now.
Down the street, everyone I see is holding hands, and the way she looks at him, everybody knows he's a lucky man. They must have found a secret to happiness. I swear I'd be a billionaire if I could bottle this. There must be something in the water, something flowing underground. Something in the water, a lot of love that's going round. Everybody feeling love, gotta drink it up. Everybody feeling love, never get enough. People feel it everywhere. All I know is there's something in the water. I could try to fight it.
So this is an example of what I would call arranging on the fly. This is a particular technique that I use in pop music as opposed to theater music. So at home, I work out the form of the arrangement and the parts and the sounds. I know what I want the guitar to do. I have a pretty clear idea of what I want the keyboards to do and what the kick pattern and snare pattern should be like. But I want to leave the space that once I'm in the studio to respond to the technology, to let it help me. And so if I find this great synth sound that I hadn't imagined, and it's really thick and it's really busy, it's got all this movement in it, then maybe I will adjust my piano sound or eliminate that. And maybe what I was thinking of doing on the piano, now I'm going to do in the bass. Or so just allowing oneself the space to create in a new way. So the total cost of this demo was $1,500 in the end. Next.
So for something quite different, So this Crazy Like You is an audition song, a spec song. I was contacted to write some spec songs for a new musical that I am not allowed to say the name of yet, I don't think. And my constraints were that I had zero access to live instruments and zero budget, except I paid an actor $100 to sing on the track, and that's it. But this is an audition for something that I really cared about. So my challenge was how to work around those constraints and still make something that would sound cool and hopefully also spark a producer's imagination by giving them more than just a piano vocal. So there's some really creative tech solutions involved in making this demo for only $100. Meticulous arranging and lots of software is kind of logistically nuts. So let me explain it. I'm a composer first, so I first composed and arranged and then orchestrated the song that I wrote with Sam Carner inside of Sibelius with all of the dynamic markings, accents, etc., like fully orchestrated. That's MIDI. So I exported that MIDI, imported the MIDI orchestration into Logic, where I swapped out some of the Sibelius samples for better Logic samples and performed other MIDI arranging tricks to make the MIDI instruments sound more natural. And then in Pro Tools, I recorded my live vocals, and I use Pro Tools because it's better for tracking and editing. I think Logic is better for arranging and sampling stuff. Then in GarageBand, because my actor only knew GarageBand, I recorded his vocals right from where he sat in his living room while I sat in my living room because COVID, and I used a software called TeamViewer to view his desktop and control GarageBand on his computer while we simultaneously FaceTimed, and my co-writer and I watched him sing and told him what to do over a group FaceTime call. That created a remote GarageBand file. Then Ben the actor sent me his GarageBand file. I sucked out his audio from there and imported it into Pro Tools so that I could edit it there. Then I imported all the resulting clean vocals back into Logic so that they could sit there with the MIDI instruments. Once in Logic, I added a bunch of plugins, and I've been taking mixing engineer lessons, so I mix and master the track myself directly in Logic. So there's no way, there's no way that you can make it completely, it was fun. Completely MIDI band sound like a live band, you just can't, even with fancy plugins. So here are a couple tricks that helped. For samples, I used Addictive Keys' proprietary library of piano sounds, and I plugged in 3 different piano samples for the piano part in different parts of the arrangement. So for example, there's like a honky-tonkish piano playing these fun licks while roomier piano holds down the accompaniment, and that gives the track a little bit more dimension to make it sound more live. I also adjusted individual velocities of the different MIDI drum hits to make the drum part less robotic and a little bit more organic throughout. I also used 2 different settings on my bass sample, one with lower distortion for the verses and more distortion for the chorus so that it cuts through there a little bit better. You can't hear it, but you can kind of feel it. So anyways, without further ado, here's how the chorus turns out, and it's all fake instruments with live singers.
She wanted things to be straight and square.
Must be why she screwed the history chair. You think you're such a sicko, honey, you're mild. This whole world's crazy too. Who's not freaky at heart? So go and go wild. It's somewhere in you. It'll run riot if you deny it. Glorify it before it's too late. You can put your time at the gym in running and swimming, but that crazy is not gonna.
Wait.
What?
Were there any women?
All right. So let's jump to low budget examples in the umbrella pop category. When we talk about low budget pop, we really talk the kinds of projects that we're talking about are emerging artists or solo EPs. An example of one of those is this EP that I recorded back in 2014. It's a singer-songwriter style project. And the purpose of this project, I was sort of wearing an artist hat and being a performing singer-songwriter, but this EP was also satisfying a publishing deal with Warner Chappell. So I was making demos to use for licensing and ad sync as well. but I was executing it on a very strict budget. So that required, in order to keep the budget down, it required a lot of prep and wearing a lot of hats in the studio, including contracting and arranging and producing. So if you remember this slide from before with all the different roles, every project is different. This project, anything that you see in red is a hat that I was wearing. And if you, the things in purple, my buddy Will Hensley was doing those. And then Chris Garanter was the mastering engineer, and I hired a bunch of performers. But if you don't see a role on this page, we didn't have it, it wasn't applicable. Okay, so yeah, what else did I want to say? I guess I'll just play. Here's a little bit of this tune, Every Moment, from the January Sessions EP. And I guess what's important is that it's live instruments in a studio. And even though it's on a budget, like, it just sounds much better when you're working with live instruments and, you know, professionals and stuff.
Partly that's because you hear the air.
What?
I was gonna say partly that's because you hear the air around the instruments when you're in
Yeah,
a,
exactly what Kathy said. Here you go.
Being blue is that when the two, one holds the other one upright. Every big moment there's a little more happiness. Every big moment there's a little more love, but every baby you find a loser.
Cool. Kat's gonna take over.
yeah, that's great, Andrea. Sounds awesome. We were gonna hopefully play all of these as examples, but we don't have time for that. So I'll just give you a little tidbit about Pine Grove, which is an alt indie rock sort of emo band. You can go listen on your own. We put credits and stuff in the handouts. The interesting thing about this band is that they're very lo-fi, and it's their vision that guides the budget and the process. They have an idea of how they want to sound, and then they execute that on a very lo-fi level because that's who they think they are. And they end up wearing all the hats except for mastering. So you can take a listen to that on your own time, but it's sort of a cool sound.
Cool. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say next budget, next part of the budget tiers.
Yeah, here we go. Well, we're still in low budget, but now we're just talking about theater specifically, which, I mean, we're using slightly different numbers for all these categories because, as it turns out, you know, the bell curve of budgets for theater and pop projects tends to be a little bit different. They don't align perfectly. So when we talk about low budget theater projects, it's like demo EPs or partial studio concept albums, almost always self-released. So here's another example. Sorry that you have to listen to like a bunch of our music here. There are other artists whose stuff we will play later. Easier to get permission to play your own stuff though. Okay, Legendale demos, yeah, Dead Again. So this is a tune, these demos, Jeff Beanstalk and I recorded after our show was produced by this theater in Denmark called Fredericia Theater. And what we wanted, the purpose of these demos was for pitching to producers in order to get more shows. And we wanted to make an album of 9 high quality demos, not the whole show, because that would have put us into a different budget category. And as it was, this project ended up on the much higher end of this budget category. So what's interesting about how we made this work is that it was an international collaboration. So instead of recording a bunch of live instruments in a studio in New York, we recorded the live band as they were playing our show in Denmark while the actors were singing in Danish. And the Danish mixing engineer mixed the live band from a live performance and sent us that recording. And then we went into the studio in New York and hired New York actors to do those vocals, and I produced that session. So it was a really cool combo, and when I play the example, you can sort of, you can hear that the band isn't really in a studio setting, but the vocals kind of are, but it gave us enough quality to really sell the music, I think. So in order to make this happen, again, highly organized sessions. And when we talk about organized sessions, here is the schedule that I made for our recording. There are a lot of vocalists jumping in and out, and you want to be really careful with people's time. So we were scheduling them like down to the minute, and with 5 and 10 minute breaks in between because factors, and that is how we roll. And also trying to leave time a little bit in between so that I would have time to comp the audio in between so that we could keep recording on top of that audio. Okay, so here is George Salazar singing Dead Again, a track from the Legend-Dale demos.
You lock and leave your tiny place. It's got 4 walls and 0 space. That's all the room your paycheck will allow. The little stores that line your street are full of people you'd love to meet. You're stuck in single player mode for now. Being lonely is a puzzle and the answer's never clear. Being social is a long forgotten skill. If you find someone to love you, they move on within a year. People move along while you are standing still.
Cool, now I get to take a nap for a minute while Kat talks.
So now I'm going to talk about mid-budget. Looking more at $30,000 to $100,000. This is a client that I've worked with in the past, Vincent Pogue. This project is an example of several issues that I needed to tackle as a producer. So one is how to accommodate an artist who is not a musician first, but who needs time to absorb the information and then respond. So I still wrote out full scores in advance. Old school for me, right? And then I went to the computer, Pro Tools, and did computer mock-ups so that the artist can respond in his own time and have the flexibility to make changes after taking it in. Then the next issue was how to create a stylistic continuity for an artist who's extremely eclectic. So this is a guy who writes everything from an Alison Krauss type bluegrass song to an Austrian beer hall song to this sort of New Orleans jazz band song. And the question is, how do I connect this on one record and make it sound like it's all part of the same record? So for me, it was the artist's voice and the artist himself as a writer. The third thing I was negotiating was, once we moved to the live sessions, how do you deal with the financial, musical, and logistical ins and outs of a large session with horns, strings, rhythm sections, sometimes specialty instruments? I once hired a snare drum player. I went to West Point and, found a military snare guy. And then how do you work that into the union rules and regulations of a limited pressing agreement, which helped us budget-wise on this and accommodating everyone's schedule? Do I pay the string players to overdub another pass, or do I hire additional string players instead? So in the end, the cost of this was sort of the high end of the mid-budget because, one, I'm doing the arrangement. He's paying for the arrangement to start with, then he's paying for the computer mock-ups and the time it takes to adjust those. And then we're paying for live sessions and editing and mixing and mastering and videos and marketing and on and on and on. So that's sort of how you get to a place like that for a project like this. The goal in the end is to make everybody happy. And I hope we did that. So you'll get a sort of taste of this other style.
And here's Gabby's super organized session spreadsheet.
Oh yeah, we did. So I forgot to mention this. So yeah, this is my version of Andrea's own color coordinated thing. So looking at how to, you have the musicians there, I want all the brass at one time, I want all the strings at one time. Some musicians are playing Broadway shows. How do you fit them in when the studio costs less money at 7 o'clock at night? So, this is kind of all the issues. On the left, you'll see the timings of the songs, because you're allowed only a certain amount of time on the limited pressing agreement per hour that you record. So this is sort of part of the gestalt that goes into organizing these huge sessions.
And if you have a producer and you don't want to do that, that's no sweat. Your producer can handle that. But if you're the producer, that is your purview. Here's that musical example.
Burned its buildings, but they could not claim it so. That mighty river's great big heart has no pity for its city prisoner on parole. You can drown the homes, but not the spirits. You can wash away the hopes and dreams, good dreams, but you can't stop the music from playing. You can't stop. You just can't stop the music from playing in New Orleans.
So that's Vincent. We're gonna plow through to the next example, which is a totally different, smaller scope record, but still the artist wanted to give herself the luxury of time here to rewrite, reimagine production, get the right vibe, tend to every detail. The other thing that brings this up into mid-budget as opposed to small budget would be the cost of the gear. She's all about the vocals. They're very expensive mics, preamps, post-production gear, even though she's working in a very small, intimate sort of studio environment. So this is Nikki, and you can sort of hear that she's all about the sound of the voice. You can take a quick listen to that.
Me without you, me without you. Oh, me without you, me without you.
So for the kinds of, I meant to mention this earlier, but the kinds of projects that we're talking about for mid-budget pop examples are really established artists with a fan base or unknown artists that still have the cash to invest. Jumping to theater mid-budget examples, we're really talking about Union Off-Broadway or a full studio concept album. And Catherine, I just noticed we're at 146, so we'll have to hustle along a little bit.
Yeah.
Here's mid-budget.
So much information. Okay, so just wanted to mention Beth Falcone's great record here, Wanda's World. She did a studio cast recording of her show, wrote music and lyrics, and wore lots and lots of hats, and recorded in New Jersey to try to keep some costs down, but still just know that large numbers of performers and moving parts would keep it sort of in a mid-budget area. So you guys should check this out when you get a chance. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the big budget theater examples. Just briefly, large differences between producing theater albums and pop albums when you get to this level, of course. In this case, you're recording in a studio in more like live sound stages to get the live sound of these big orchestras and casts that have been rehearsing all along. The other differences in, Andrew will talk about the pop production approach, but the pre-production for major theater, Broadway shows is that, I'll do it really quickly. The team meets with a record producer. The team would be music director, supervisor, the director of the show, the writers, the arrangers, the orchestrator, usually the lead producer. They discuss how to translate this work from the stage to a live recording. So they choose the material, the segues, which dialogue do we want to use? How do we create this album that captures what's happening on stage, but in an album format? Then they determine which studio is best, how many sessions. Are we going to enhance the number of musicians at those sessions? And they usually record cast albums in 1 or 2 days tops. Lots of personnel and moving parts. So Andrea will show you quickly on this slide. Along with union costs and expensive recording studios, sometimes sound stages will help drive up the costs. But you will see that should be color. There are the colors, yay. So you'll see that sort of every different color is a different person here doing a different job. So lots of personnel on these huge projects. The next thing, and so this is, we'll play you the carousel example, and then I'll just mention a little something about Hadestown. can hear the sound of that glorious orchestra and the space, what I was talking about, the air around it. It's very different recording on these live sound stages, big rooms. This was done in Studio A at Avatar. Very different feeling than some of these other pop recordings where there's a lot of samples and MIDI and all that kind of stuff. In Hades, oh, there's my phone, yay. And, so quickly about Hadestown, just know that there was not only a Broadway cast recording recorded of this, but a studio concept album. I'm just going to mention that the studio concept album is a great way to help promote the show in advance. It helps theater thrive. It helps new theater to be discovered, and you can submit to the Grammys. Check out the Hadestown album. It's fabulous when you get a chance. We don't have time to play it. Next.
Cool.
And you can submit to the Grammys. Go.
Yeah. So, and again, I didn't say this before, but for big budget theater, the category, the kinds of projects that you're talking about there are Broadway cast albums or full studio concept albums. And in big budget pop category, the kinds of projects that we're talking about are established big name artists or albums supported by big label money. An example of one of those is Alicia Keys' new album, Alicia. We're going to play the track Underdog. Many writers and producers involved. It was recorded at Jungle City Studios, which is owned and operated by Anne Mincielli, who is really cool because Anne is a first-rate engineer. She's Alicia's right hand. She co-created She Is the Music, an initiative to help promote women producers, engineers, and creators, which is amazing. Before I play this real quick, I want to mention some generalized differences between theater recording and pop recording. And again, these are general, but when you're working in theater, it's more typical that you've got a composer and a lyricist or one person doing both. Whereas in pop, it's often many songwriters, possibly even many producers working on the same track. For theater, everything tends to be written out meticulously in advance. For pop, it's more likely to, you're more likely to be using studio time to explore sounds and experiment to get the right vibe. In theater, you're starting with great ingredients and you're making an authentic replication of a live performance most often, which means that it's typically recorded as if the show were being performed in the studio with a lot of people there. Whereas in pop, you're starting with great ingredients, but you're often spending more time controlling, manipulating, and transforming those ingredients to achieve a unique sound for the song, which means it's often recorded in a much more piecemeal way and then constructed together. So you can have multiple players on different songs who don't even necessarily interact. In theater, you'd lean more towards authenticity, and in pop, you lean more towards precision in terms of how you deal with the sound. You can get lost in detail if you have the time and the money. When Thriller came out, their production budget was $750,000, which with inflation today would be $2 million. When it's hearsay that when Michael Jackson was in the studio, he spent days making all of these noises and breath sounds and little like stuff, like days of that on the microphone, and it took his actors weeks to compile all these sounds and then pick out exactly the right one. So you can really get lost in detail if you want. Vocally speaking, when we're talking about recording for theater, you're looking for a vocal that draws you in with a specific story. It's about the actor first and maybe the voice second. Whereas in pop, it's really a vocal that's drawing you in with the sound of the voice itself. It's about the voice. So Underdog, again, just the thing that I mentioned about a lot of people working on this track. These are the credits from Alicia's album for just 3 different songs. And in Underdog, you can see that there are many, many composers and lyricists, and that the producer also doubled as a co-writer. So here is a snippet from Underdog.
So I sing a song for the hustlers trading at the bus stop, single mothers waiting on a check to come, young teachers, student doctors, sons on the front line knowing they don't get to run. This goes up to the underdog. Keep on keeping it what you love, you'll find that someday soon enough you will rise up, yeah.
You can hear the money on the track because it's so smooth, it's so clean, like the mixing, the mastering, it's so tight. It's
hard to get all that on Zoom audio, but you know,
yeah.
when you listen to these examples on headphones at home, it'll be a whole different experience. So, yeah.
Yep. So we want to leave you with just a few things and then we can jump into questions. But in closing,
most important, review your motives. Why are you making this recording? What do you want it to sound like? Don't lose sight of your goals in this area.
The second most important thing to remember in closing is exactly the same thing. Really, we cannot stress that enough. Review your motives. It's easy to lose track of them, and it's the one thing that's going to keep your project focused, moving in the right direction. Also, listen. Keep your references handy. Keep a focus on what things you want, what you want things to sound like by often reviewing initial inspirations, references, and goals.
And most important, stay true to each song and your voice as an artist. To me, this is the most crucial thing. Ensure that every arrangement decision supports the heart and the soul of what you're trying to express, right? Don't get lost in the weeds. Don't get lost when pulled in different directions. In the end, just remember, when you're confused, when you're thinking about what to do next, go back to the song, go back to what it's about, go back to why you decided to do this. And, you know, support your voice. So.
And also, thank you for supporting Maestra. Woo!
And I just want to say, before we take questions, I have to thank Andrea, my partner in crime here, because not only for her extraordinary musicianship, good humor, smarts, persistence,
Goodness gracious.
and last but not least, her tremendous PowerPoint skills. So thank you, Andrea.
Ditto, ditto.
Fun. Questions,
please.
So wonderful. All right, we do have a couple questions. I think we have time for at least one or two of them before we hit that 2 o'clock mark. So I'm gonna jump right in. But first, yes, thank you so much. That was so amazing. So the first question is, do either of you have experience with TuneCore or DistroKid, and which service do you recommend and why, if you do?
Andrea, do you have any experience with them?
I have experience with TuneCore. That's how I know it costs $49 per year per album. I don't have experience with DistroKid, but TuneCore is pretty easy, and I would recommend it.
And I've heard great things about TuneCore. I don't know about DistroKid either, but I've heard great things about TuneCore, and I think they're really well put together.
Great. The next question is for Andrea. What mixing class are you taking?
Oh, I just have a really good friend who's a Grammy-winning mixing engineer, and I'm paying him to teach me things.
Oh, that's good.
But I'm happy to share his info, because I know that he has since that time decided to teach lessons to other people too. So
yeah, if your mixing friend is comfortable sharing his information and you want to put it in the chat or send it out as an email, that would be great.
I'm happy to do that. I will double check with him that that's fine, and then I will send it out as an email to participants.
Yeah.
I also have my partner is great at mixing too, and he might be interested in helping anybody who's interested as well. So.
Oh, and also there are, this would be a different experience, but in the handout, we've tried to include a bunch of resources, including some like free online production classes, if that's something that you're interested in, or rabbit hole you want to go down. Slam Academy is a great resource that I just discovered. Patrick James is a teacher there. And you'll see in the handout when Jamie sends them out that there are actually a lot of production videos that you can watch online. And it's not the same as talking to a single human, but you know, it's a good way to get a lot of information very conveniently. The internet is your friend.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so participants can look out for an email or possibly more than one email from me in the future with potential resources on this matter. And then for both of you, this next question, the programs and or templates that you used for scheduling your recording sessions.
Excel for me. That's my favorite way to work. I use it for my taxes, and I also use it for scheduling sessions, and it gives me tremendous options, and it also allows you to tally money, which is the great thing about Excel. So you add costs, you add up costs as you go. If you're dealing with union contracts and all that as well. So, and Andrea, what do you use?
I didn't have a program. I mean, I use Numbers, which is the Mac version of Excel if I need to do something like that. But the thing that I showed was just in Pages, and I just spent a lot of time on it.
But colors are really helpful. We love
yes.
You can tell both of us love
colors are great.
We love colors. That's great. So we do have more questions.
Google Sheets is great too. I saw Lori just said that. Google Sheets is great.
Google Sheets.
Great. We do have more questions, but it's 1:58. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that anyone who does need to leave us right at 2, you are free to go. I'm going to put our links in the chat one more time for our classes and our social media handle. And if you'd like to donate to us, there's our donate link. I'm also going to remind you that you can save the chat by right where you put questions. There's a box with 3 dots, and if you click it, it gives you the option to save the chat. There's a lot of really great resources in the chat today. So that's how you do that. And I'd also like to say thank you again to Kathy and Andrea for such an amazing presentation. It's so wonderful. That PowerPoint is the bomb, and I love a good PowerPoint. So we will continue with our questions, but anyone who does need to leave, you are free to go.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
And we're happy to stay for more questions. So
yeah, we can stay till whenever.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So the next question is, we had somebody tell a tale of CD Baby and how they used to make it possible to download self-produced original cast album on their website, but they no longer provide that service. And they also, while we also pressed physical CDs for whatever reason, the digital version of the album is now stuck in some limbo and is not yet available on Apple Music and other digital platforms because CD Baby says they won't or can't recognize the artist original 2018 Northern Sky Theater cast. Are you aware of other indie folks in similar situations with CD Baby and or any workarounds to that problem? Their only option right now is to change the performer name to the book writer since they have a performer profile that they recognize from his other albums.
So we're saying this is a metadata issue, like they already have a different like profile data situation for one of these people, and so they can't count as a second for the second project. I'm not totally sure I understand the question. I don't know other indie artists that are facing that issue, and I can't totally tell what the issue is.
I think if I understand correctly, I'm not 100% sure, but it sounds like it's no longer possible to download the album on the website through CD Baby.
I know that CD Baby has fees for keeping physical copies of your music in their warehouse. And like if you're selling well, then they don't charge you for that to restock and stuff. But like if you stop selling a certain amount, then they charge you to be storing your stuff. I don't know if they have some kind of digital fees for that. I can't imagine that they would, but I also haven't worked with CD Baby in like 10 years.
I haven't worked with them in a long time either, and I haven't heard of other artists having that issue, but is it that the issue is you don't want to pay again to put it on a different service at this point? Because it does sound like there's some weird administrative metadata issue going on there.
Yeah, it sounds administrative. And whoever's question that is, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I'll
clarify.
I'll just unmute here and say that we're paying for the account and everything, but they've shifted so that for whatever reason, they say that they'll put your stuff up on Apple and Spotify and all that, but it's just stuck in a limbo. And I was just curious. Maybe we'll try shifting it to TuneCore or something. It just seems weird to change a performer name to somebody who's not actually performing, but is the writer. And it is some kind of metadata thing, but for whatever reason, I wouldn't recommend CD Baby for what that's worth.
Sorry, it sounds like a sort of a deep hole. They also, I mean, when you're distributing stuff, there is a time delay between when you submit it to them and like when it actually appears in the world. It's not an immediate thing. Yeah. So you have to sort of plan releases. Like
it used to be available on their website.
I see.
They stopped, and we never distributed the physical through them. We do that through the theater.
I see.
But the CD Baby took away all of their whole web portal, and they don't do physical distribution anymore. They've gone straight to putting things up on YouTube and sending what you did have digitally. We have old download card codes, and those will still work.
That's good to know.
But yeah, whatever they did with their shift, I don't think it's super friendly. Really, it no longer fills its original purpose, I don't think.
That's a shame. No,
I've had no issues with TuneCore, so I would, I guess, recommend them or talking to someone on the helpline for CD Baby.
Do you have other recommendations for distributors outside of CD Baby and other recommendations other than TuneCore? Because that was actually another question that we have.
Oh, they exist. I don't have a Rolodex of them.
Kathy, I don't have them at the moment at my fingertips, but we can certainly ask around more and get more information about that if people want it.
Great. Our next question is, when you're an emerging artist, how much is the proper per hour rate for paying your instrumentalists?
Per session, you mean? For one tune, are we talking about one tune or for an album or EP? We don't. Okay.
The question was per hour, but what's the proper rate in general, I guess, is the real question.
I wouldn't pay less than $100 an hour for a musician. Usually, if I'll have somebody come in for $200 on a project. It depends how much travel, you have to sort of weigh all that. Sometimes they'll do it for less if you like, will you do these 3 tunes for $200 or something like that. As long as you keep moving quickly, then that usually works out for people. You can also a lot of times get your friends to work cheaper. If it's a project that is not making a lot of money yet and there's not a big budget behind it. So I would explore that. Different levels of expertise for different prices always. For a buyout, I wouldn't pay less than about $300 per song. If it was something where you're going to pay royalties, that's a different kind of situation. So.
Any tips for creating MIDI guitar when you can't use a live guitarist? I.e., I've just discovered the acoustic 12-string chords sample on Logic. That's from the asker, not me.
I was just exploring that. And I do have some recommendations, but I don't have them at my fingertips. So I think one of them is in-session audio, but I was actually just about to dig into guitars. Usually I have guitar players work with me on that stuff. And the only MIDI guitar I've actually ever used is a couple of really bad samples in Pro Tools and a fairly decent 12-string sample in Expand. But I know that there are newer programs with some great sounds, so I can get back to you on that. Whoever's question that was, I'll get back.
And I would just add that some samples, not all samples are created equal. So if there's another musical project that I'm working on right now that it has to be all MIDI basically because there's no budget for it. But I got a friend to come and play guitar for me because if there's one instrument that I don't want to use MIDI for, it's guitar. And also, if you're trying to make MIDI sound like a live band, it really helps if at least there's one live instrument in there. Because that live instrument and the air around it can kind of mask the fact that other things are MIDI. So I'd go for live guitar when possible.
Yeah, and the strumming on live guitar MIDI is the hardest thing to emulate, and the programming, even in these new programs, is so deep and time consuming to get the feel that you want, because you have to go through 1,000 samples and rhythms and processes to sort of get, create the part that you want. So
it's almost easier. Like you save more time.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, you save more of your time if you just decide how much your time is worth and then pay someone.
And you also get the creativity of your guitar player, which is very cool always. It's like, well, if I capo it, it's going to be so much better. Listen to how great this sounds this way. So
your advice would basically be to MIDI everything else, but just get the real guitarist.
Nothing like
in a pinch.
Also, we didn't say
nothing like the real thing.
But nothing, as Andrea was saying, nothing like one live instrument. It's like the voice live, and is it a fiddle or is it a guitar or is it a flute or an oboe or one thing that makes your track feel live, and it changes everything. Also, if you're programming a lot of MIDI strings, if you put one string on that, it changes everything because the ear hears the live and then the rest of it supports it. So.
Same thing happens, I think, orchestrating in theater pits and stuff.
Right.
You have a live string section, and then you support that by also adding additional synthetic strings in certain spots. It's a trick.
Right.
Great. Our next question is, I am new to composing and have used GarageBand to start making rough demos of the songs in my show. What kind of artist would you recommend I seek out to collaborate with for the cleanup of tracks, or transfer them to Logic for a better sound?
Cleanup of tracks. That's right. Well, you could team up with an engineer, of course, who's proficient in that software. GarageBand, I'm not a Logic person, I'm a Pro Tools person, but from what I've seen, I did some GarageBand way back. from what I've seen, Logic, I sat in on the Maestra Logic seminar, and it seems that it's so similar to GarageBand that it's not a great leap for you as an individual to just jump in and do it yourself. I mean, just start the learning.
You mean from GarageBand to Logic?
Yeah. What do you think?
It's true that GarageBand is like the entry-level program to Logic, and Logic goes a lot deeper. Just like iMovie or something is the Apple entry-level program to Final Cut Pro. But when you do get into Logic, there are it's worth like watching internet videos, you know, or taking free classes and stuff, because there's so much to know. There's so much potential there, and it just takes time. The more time that you spend with it, the more projects that you are forced to create in that program, the more you learn every time. And my experience with technology has always been like, oh, well, I think I could do that. Let's just try it. And then, oh, I'll definitely be able to do that in like a month. And then 5 years later, it's like, now I can do it. It just like takes forever.
It takes a long time. Right.
Yeah, Pearl is saying in the chat that Logic also has a really long free trial period. It's maybe 60 days. So yeah, you can definitely try that stuff out if it's a cost thing. But if you feel comfortable moving to Logic, I would definitely do that over GarageBand if you want to collaborate with other people, just because it's a more professional program, and the more comfortable you get in that program, the easier it will be to be like sharing files with people and not drive other people crazy with like, there are a lot of limitations for GarageBand that you sort of figure out once you transition.
But there's also a benefit to teaming up, as you said. This person said they were looking for a collaborator, so that's possible too. And in that case, it would be either an engineer or a producer that was fluent in Logic and could work with you. So that's always a great.
If you're looking for co-writers, just find a co-writer who's very tech savvy. Like, hey, we should write a song, and you should record it.
Right.
What else?
I'm going to put out a last call for questions in the chat because I'm through my list. And Lori, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, sorry. I was gonna skip writing it because it's a little long and convoluted, but I'm not gonna take up too much time, hopefully. Firstly, thank you so much, Andrea and Kathy and Maestra, for setting this up. This has been so wonderful. My question is towards the end of, like, once you're done with all the recording and all the post-production, and now you're ready to release and distribute. This is the part that I guess, suffer at the most, I think, which is like, okay, now I did all of this work and I'm exhausted and I feel like I've put like half my life into these recordings and all these people and all this money, right? And now it's like, who's gonna care once I put it out, you know? So obviously, I mean, you have your network and you have like other people that you know, and then you're gonna share it. Hopefully you have like a demographic in mind. But what happens if you like don't? Like right now I'm working on this project, which started off as like kind of like a passion project as a gift for my mom. And then it turned into this thing. And now I feel like people need to hear it because it's got like this amazing story and it has this wonderful music. So we're in the middle of recording this, but it's such a new territory for me that I don't know what the actual demographic is. So even if I do put it out, who will listen? You know what I mean? So do you have any advice on like either like PR people or like figuring out, you know, like who will listen? And also I was even playing with the idea of like putting it on like a Kickstarter thing to recoup some of the costs and also create like some sort of buzz around it as well, and some pre-ordering as well. Just any advice?
You're asking who's going to listen to it. I would ask you back, who do you want to listen to it? Because that will affect my answer to this question. Anybody?
So,
do you have like a you know, are you talking about a circle of friends, but you want it to be in a wider community, or you have a sort of fan base already, you can put it in a mailing list, but then beyond that, you're not sure what the next step is? What's the current situation?
So it's like, besides my usual music stuff that I do, this is like Greek music from the 30s and 40s that my grandfather used to sing and never got a chance to record because he was diagnosed with throat cancer and had to have his vocal cords removed. So right before he was like a rising star, and right before he was able to record, he had to have his vocal cords removed. So I wanted to gift my mom for her 70th birthday this album full of these songs that I discovered from like a bunch of like museum and library just like scrufflings, and I've arranged them, and now they're in, like, I have all these musicians like in their homes recording. It's like a whole big thing. So now it would feel like, I feel like everyone needs to hear it, but I have no idea like who would want to listen to this.
So that's a really specific project. So you don't want to just send it out to totally random people. Yeah, agreed. Beth, it is an amazing story. So I guess I would say, I mean, just like if you're starting out as a singer-songwriter performer, you want people to listen, so you can submit to radio stations, local radio stations, or reviewers, or there are a lot of indie resources that will give you access to all kinds of magazines, online or physical, where you can submit music and people will review it or possibly include it in an issue. I can go dig up some of those like indie resources because they're gathering dust in my closet somewhere, but they're available. And if you get the product out to as many people as possible who have the power to then share it further and tell them that story, like that's a powerful story, then that's a way to attack people that have zero connection to you whatsoever. If you're interested in more like trying to get a record deal or something, that would be a different kind of approach. Kathy, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that I think it's a really beautiful project. It sounds fascinating, and two things occur to me. One is that I have a friend who used to do a lot of who's Greek, who did a lot of live performing, and apparently there's a huge circuit of Greek music fans, and I could certainly ask him how to access that circuit, and might explore that as well, see what else is out there. And the other thing is, I wonder if you went to just the Greek embassy, or anything.
I used to work there.
Anything attached to the culture that could open up an interesting door for you. And the third is just maybe to sell the story, to talk to a PR person about this story, which is powerful. And then there's the music sort of attached to it. And you might then sell it that way, promote it that way online as, as the story and the album. So
I just put a link in the chat to indiebible.com. That's the big resource that I was thinking of. It's a music promotion, marketing, and all-inclusive directory. So their catchphrase is learn how to sell your music, find distribution, and contract record labels and all that stuff. And they've just got a ton of helpful information in there. And I think being specific, like Kath said, about who you share it with, and just that you make sure it's always attached to the story is probably the best way to go about getting it in the world. And you mentioned Kickstarter too. Sorry, go ahead, Kat.
No, you finish. Go ahead.
You mentioned Kickstarter too. I think it's probably harder to put a project on Kickstarter that you have already finished and you're just looking for people to pay you back for it because it's already kind of available to the world. But if you find a different way to frame it creatively, is like, now you need help sharing it with the rest of the world. And just don't mention that you're trying to get people to give you money.
I wasn't going to release it yet, because I'm just going to give it to my mom, and that's going to be like one thing. But then I want to do like a pre-order or something via Kickstarter, so it wouldn't be available just in case we find extra songs.
There was a Chopra record that was put out a few years ago. I think it was called Home, and it was a compilation of poetry and then music attached to the poetry, music that was inspired by the poems. And I wonder if there's a way for you to create a different kind of package in that, where there's a story attached to each song, and you market it that way. It could be.
Mhm.
And I see that Georgia also mentioned about the same thing I was talking about, finding the Greek lineage approach. So, yeah.
I'm also putting the
Thank you.
indiestreamingbible.com link into the chat too.
Yeah.
There are two of them apparently. There we go.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
We put our emails in the handout, so if there's a burning question that you come up with 3 days from now,
Right.
just
Feel
ping
free.
us.
Right.
And there are lots of resources in the handout too. And we're also, well, I forgot to mention this, there's an additional handout with all the credits from the music that we played. So if you're interested in finding out, oh, who was the mastering engineer on that one track from the 40th slide, like you can find that information.
Yeah.
Great. And we have not had other questions come in. So I think that is it. So
Sweet.
again, Kathy, Andrea, thank you both so much. This was such a wonderful, informative class. We are all so grateful for this. And
I'm
everybody,
grateful that my cats did not interrupt it in the middle. It was a touch and go
I'm
there for a
grateful
minute.
that my cats did not. Thank you everybody for being here. We hope to see you again at a future Maestra class. Andrea and Kathy, thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.